Welcome back, everyone, to the Moms Like Me podcast powered by Support Now. There are times where I show up to the podcast and I'm excited. There are times where I show up to the podcast and I'm nervous. There are times when I show up to the podcast and I am just so dang happy because I get to talk to people that I feel so aligned with. And this is one of those episodes. I have known Katie Taylor for probably close to a year now. And on top of being an entrepreneur and CEO of an incredible company called Support Spot, which we will get into later, she's a mom and she's an entrepreneur. So I connect with her on so many levels. So this episode will feel a little different because it is different. So Katie, thank you so much for some of your valuable time. I'm so happy that you're here with me.
Jordan, thanks for having me. And likewise, I could say the same thing about you. It's been really fun getting to watch you just launch and soar and see the gap that Support Now is filling. So very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, first, let me start with, I would love you to give a quick introduction. You know, you are a child life specialist. And I very admittedly, I was very, let's call it like naive to what a child life specialist is or was before I started Support Now. So I'd love for you to share a little bit more about your background, what a child life specialist is, and then what inspired you to build your company, Support Spot.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you've never heard of the term child life specialist, that's totally okay. We are so used to what we call the elevator speech, in which we're having to explain our role. Y'all, we will be working with someone for well over a year every day, and they'll go, wait, what was your job again? So it's totally fine. As a child life specialist, we are essentially child development and family system and psychosocial care experts. So we marry all of those three things together and really investigate, assess, and then deliver on the best way to support families as they're facing difficult life circumstances. Most notably, you'd see us in healthcare organizations like hospitals and clinics and hospice, but there are child life specialists who also work in the community or private practice or schools. And what we do is we kind of just take that lens of trauma-informed care and ask, what's the best way we can support families? So that looks everywhere from diagnosis teaching and helping a child understand at their typical development level what diabetes means. Sometimes it's supporting children at the end of life and helping their siblings say goodbye. And sometimes it's running bingo in the playroom. So we're kind of all over the place.
Well, and I think there's such a common, people conflate like a social worker and a child life specialist or a psychologist and a child life specialist. So the way I look at a child life specialist is it's like the Venn diagram. Like you can cover a lot of that area, that surface area, but it is its own distinct role. And what I've learned from you is that typically, especially in a hospital setting, these child life specialists, they're highly valued, but there's one to many, meaning a lot of hospitals don't have enough child life specialists, so they're very spread thin. Is that still the case?
Yeah, and I think what was most surprising is I worked clinically for over a decade at the bedside, whether it was ambulatory surgery or the NICU or hematology oncology or a med-surg floor. And I was always surprised by the care, the support, really the psychosocial support resources that families get are completely dependent on who is available that day. So a scenario I'll give you is when I worked in the NICU, there were 80 babies in our NICU, and I was one part-time child life specialist. So there was just going to be no way that I could go meet and support all these families. And at the same time, I worked with a social worker. So when you talk about that Venn diagram, it's a perfect way to say it. She was one social worker to my 80 babies plus another 80 women in the labor and delivery center. So we truly were like, okay, where are the fires? What can we put out? But that doesn't mean that the other families who aren't totally burning up in flames right at that moment don't need and deserve that equitable support that should be available to all families.
And this, in so many words, was the driving force behind Support Spot. So tell everyone more about what the need that you saw and what you've built.
I think I've always been a little bit like of that entrepreneur spirit. So my dad is my co-founder, and Jordan, you've gotten to meet him. So we refer to him as Dad. But he says his job is like keeping my feet on the ground. So like I can be up in the clouds and dreaming. But for me, it was really this like injustice that if I wasn't there that day, families didn't get access to child life. And I wanted to fix that. And so being kind of the entrepreneurial spirit that I was when my first hospital integrated into their first electronic health record and EHR, I signed up to be a super user. I wanted to know how technology could help us. Then I developed the Child Life on Call podcast, and I essentially did market research interviews week over week with families, hearing about what they needed. And we really had the opportunity to build, when we started in 2020, this mobile app, which is on iOS and Android, that we license to hospitals so that as soon as families are admitted to the hospital, they get all of our support resources. It doesn't at all replace what Child Life Services does with families. It couldn't. Even the best robot that we could develop couldn't replace a child life specialist. But for me, that never seemed to outweigh the need and the fact that families deserve how to prepare their child for what to expect, how to advocate, how to collaborate with the care team, what they need to know about what's happening next. And that's really what SupportSpot delivers.
And my understanding as well about the app is that it's also something that they can bring home, where you're not limited to inside the hospital to be gaining these insights about how they can support their child, even if they're not inside the hospital walls.
That's exactly right. And the biggest, case study for us with that is that we also license SupportSpot to organizations. So there's one amazing organization we work with. It's called Hope for HIE. And HIE, which just very quickly, is essentially a brain injury at birth. And if you have HIE, then you immediately get a NICU stay, and it's really traumatic for the entire family. And what I've learned from these parents is that it's not until after discharge day that you really start to process what in the world just happened. And support resources then are so important, but we know they don't always follow you home from the hospital. So it kind of bridges that gap like you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean that checks out even from my own experience talking to families. One of the most common themes I hear is that the help that families need is oftentimes once they leave a medical facility, because that's actually when they're the most afraid, because they can't hit a call button. They can't peek their head out and look for a nurse or a child life specialist. It's when they get home. And I think as a culture, we tend to think, oh, well, they're not in the hospital, so they're okay. And
Yeah.
so what you're really doing is empowering the caregivers to feel more in control, to feel more confident in the actions that they're taking, which I think is so perfect for this digital age that we're in, where parents and moms specifically, we're doing a lot of this research, and we want to feel like we can do it ourselves, because it is an inconvenience to have to get in the car and go to a doctor. So if you at least can not necessarily triage, but kind of like double check your instincts inside of this resource, well, that is reducing overwhelm for parents in a time where, again, no matter the situation, you're always going to be a little overwhelmed. So I love it. I absolutely love it. And you know that. One of my questions, and part of what I was so eager to get on the call with you about, is you're so impressive. You are a mom. You are a entrepreneur. I do have no idea how you work with your dad. That is like, I think of my own father. I could never do that. I know how hard this road is to build a family, to build a company. So as a leader, as an entrepreneur, what are some of the things that you do? What are some of the habits that you've created that have allowed you to build while also being present with your children?
Over the past year, I've started the practice of journaling, which I've never done before, but I think it's offered a lot of reflection for me and redefining success. Because if we truly talk about the entrepreneurial journey of Child Life on Call and SupportSpot, it started off really strong, and then we lost a lot of traction. And it's really hard to work with hospitals, and they're year-long sales cycles. And so if I was defining success by the number of hospital contracts I got every month, then I would consistently be failing. And I think what I have to do is, just like yesterday, I had an email come in from a mom that had listened to the podcast. And it was truly the entire reason that we're doing the podcast, and that's so other parents can learn from other parents. And she said that she felt like she hadn't ever been heard or validated, and she just felt like she was shaking her head and finally had she put it like her tribe that she was looking for. And that's how I have to define success as an entrepreneur. Of course, I need to have enough profit to sustain my business, pay myself, pay those who work to support Child Life on Call. But that can't be the only measure. If I get to pick my kids up and take my daughter to dance at 3:15, that's a freedom I never had when working in the hospital. I get to meet
Yeah.
someone like you and just decide to work with you because it aligns. That's a freedom I never had in the hospital. So I have to look at a bunch of different buckets and not just the profit bucket.
Yeah, and isn't it so hard day to day to not get caught up in the data and the analytics? Like in some ways as a business owner, I always feel like you have to follow the data and you can't be obsessed with it because you have to find ways of finding these little wins to keep you going, especially when you're early days and still really trying to break through. And by the way, on the hospital thing, I know we've talked about this before offline. Hospitals, it's a very hard route. It's a very hard route, and they serve a very important purpose, but it just means that the days are long and they can be slow. And I'm sure it can be frustrating at times where you've been in that hospital setting where you're like, I know how valuable this is. I just need you to help. I need you to see that. I really appreciate the acknowledgement on the kid pickup thing or the dance thing because you're right. Those are some of the things that kind of can get lost
Yeah.
in all of the kind of the frantic nature of building. But it's like, it's not about what you aren't doing, but it's about what you get to do now as a result of this life change.
Yeah, it's interesting too now with summer and really trying to manage the house in addition to working, and I feel like I'm always like leaving the kids with their iPads so I can come in here and do a meeting. But the truth is I'm able to be here, leave the kids with their iPads and come in and do a meeting. So it really is like, which way do I want to look at it? That I have to choose something else or that I get to do it. And because of that, I get to work weird hours. I love working Sundays. When I was in the hospital, I hated working Sundays. So it's really like, sure, it's a lot of risk. It's a lot of stress.
A lot of
But
stress.
for me, the benefits of continuing to grow and build with a mission-driven organization far outweigh any of the barriers that I found.
Do you find, or do you ever feel like you're also really mirroring or modeling rather to your children? Like they see you in this setting. They see you going into the office. I think sometimes as moms we feel bad. Oh, I wish I could do this. And
Yeah.
sometimes I think it's like, well, what a beautiful thing that they get to see that, yes, I'm going to give you these things and we're going to go on these trips or wherever. But that also means that I'm going to have to hop into an office and turn on my computer every once in a while because this is how I afford and how I'm able to provide for you.
Totally. I remember one time I was working at the kitchen table. I love doing that because it makes me feel like I'm there. And my daughter was drawing something and I was like, "What are you drawing?" And she lifted up like a piece of paper and it was like her app that
Yeah,
she
love
was
it.
designing. And I was like, that is so cool that we get to model that. And whether or not the app continues to be successful where it grows, like I've taught my daughter that she can build whatever she wants.
No, I love that. And I think something I tell myself, and I'm sure I think you'll agree, there's something really empowering about being able to tell yourself that you've already accomplished what you set out to do. You've built a company.
Yeah.
The question is can it be commercially successful enough so you can sustain it? But you've done what you set out to do. And I also have found that like that's a really powerful reframe because I think as a culture we tend to measure things on, are they generating enough revenue or how successful was an exit or this, but it's like no, you've already done it. You've already been successful because look at what you've built. It's already here. And so many
Yeah.
companies
Oh, you're
fail
gonna
to
make
get
me
from
cry.
well, but so many companies fail to get from ideation to launch, and you've done that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, Katie, like to be totally blunt, like you have been such an inspiration for me on so many levels. For this
Mhm.
podcast, like I saw what you were doing with Child Life on Call on the podcast. I'm like, that's so smart. That's so brilliant. I should do that too because we know that there are so many amazing families out there, moms especially, but not always just moms. And they have stories and they're so extraordinary. And yes, we can use it for market research, but we can also do it because don't they deserve their own community?
Oh,
Eh,
1,000%. And, it's interesting. I look back now as like that was a market research phase, but that's never been the mission of the podcast. It's really to give parents a safe place to share. And I just happen to learn so much from them.
No, but it really, like, it really is such an enlightening. I find it very humbling, because it's so easy, at least for me, to get caught up in, like, build, 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 do this and this and this, and then you sit down with the family and you hear about what they really need, and you're like, "Okay, how can I actually make this person's life easier?" Not, "How do I make a feature?" It's like, "I wanna make their life just this much easier, this much less stressful," and like, that is so motivating. I know you feel that.
It's so true. And going back to what you were saying about like measuring success by the outcome of your business, whether it's commercial or you exit, that's also a trap. Because if you really do interview and look at the people who have been so successful, they continue to build or they say, I met the goal and now what? I met the goal and am I still, but at what cost did we meet it? So I think you're right to like ask these questions and I like want to get it back into my journaling to remind myself of like, what is the purpose of all of this? And that is I go back, I see myself in the NICU looking at all the babies and the families who were hurting and didn't have any support. And I said, how can we make a difference there? And I have to remember that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, you are, and again, I think this is why it's just as much cathartic for me as it is for you, this conversation, because it is the duality of trying to build and trying to sustain and trying to prove yourself while also reminding yourself that you've already helped, you've already done it. You've already helped families just by nature of the podcast, of the people that have chosen to download the app, of the hospitals that have chosen to pursue you. That's great. And never to forget that, just like that, the family member, the customer you were referencing earlier, like you changed their day. And that's an amazing thing to do, to be able to go to bed at night saying you're impacting someone. And again, there's a balance. And I think that's super valuable. One of the other questions I want to ask you about is how the heck you work with your dad. What is that dynamic like? How do you balance that? What does that look like, practically speaking? I mean, what a special relationship you all must have to be able to go into business together.
Yeah, it's so funny. There's not one other member of my family, including my husband, I could go into business with. So I do think there's something that's like our personalities work together. He's had 40 years of experience in Medicaid and managed care. And I've always looked to him to be this like complete asset of information and wealth and knowledge. And I ask him all the time, I'm like, write down everything you know because I want to know it. So I think like I look at him as just such an amazing strategic leader, also the most generous man that I've ever met, and generous in his time, generous in his money, generous in his input, his skills. And I think when you're working with someone that you admire, like that's probably what the secret sauce is. And that's how I feel about him.
That's so sweet. I'm sure you've shared that with him, or at least with
He
her.
knows, there was that whole like trend on social media that's like I'm rich because.
Yes.
And like when I'm thinking about measuring success with the money that's in our bank account, or is it something like working and building alongside my dad to make the world a better place? Like that absolutely wins every time.
Well, and talk about, again, modeling from a different perspective. It's not just modeling to your children about mom working hard to build and provide, but mom working with my grandfather or our
Yeah.
grandfather and
Oh,
seeing.
they love being like, mom is papa's boss. It's their favorite thing.
I mean, it's really an adorable dynamic, and one you just don't see very often. Husband, wife, not.
I was
I
about
want
to
to say
say
super.
you have some secrets here too because you work with your husband.
I do, I do. It's actually the best part. So I think in some ways you're right. It just depends on the relationship. I I uh, I could never work with my dad. I could never work with my sisters. I love them
Yeah.
and they're the
Yeah.
best, and never ever. It's an interesting thing to go to work and almost like go to battle every day. And you just have to,
Yeah.
in my opinion, it's just like offsetting energies and skill sets. but a shared belief, like like an
Yeah.
intrinsic shared belief that the world can be better as a result of what you're building. And I know that's how you feel. And, like we were talking about at the beginning, before we started hitting record, the journey of entrepreneurship, part of what's so aggravating to me at least is we see it. And you just got to get the rest of the world to begin to see it. And being in the early adopter stage is hard. Like, and you are an early adopter. So for you, I'm sure I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm a laggard. So I always joke like I would be the last person to start using new practice because that's just my personality. But if you're an early adopter, I would imagine it's even harder when you're talking to people and you're like, well, why haven't you done it? Why haven't you signed the contract? Why haven't you downloaded the app? And some people just by nature of how they're wired, they don't want to be first.
It makes sense. Like, there's a whole part of like change management, whether it's happening in the hospital and trying to get someone to adjust to a new way of life. And I remember that too. Like when a manager would come in and say, this is how we're doing things now. And you go, why? Like, I wasn't consulted. Why am I thinking of this? And I think one of my favorite things about Support Spot specifically is that anytime we've worked with a hospital, it's because the clinicians have advocated to the top for it.
Mm.
And that's not a great business strategy in long term because clinicians are so tired and they have other things on their mind and they want PTO and they want more money. And so often the things they'd like to make their job easier just don't get priority. But at the same time, what a testament that our users and the people advocating for it are the clinicians that know it'll make a big difference.
Right. It's a slower model, but it can be a very impactful one when done correctly because it shows that the people that are going to be using it or distributing it really believe in it. It's not something that's being pushed upon them. Rather, it's something that they're saying, this will make our families' lives better. This will also improve the quality of care that we can provide as a result. And again, hopefully, hospitals see that as a result of all of that, everything from a perception and brand perspective also increase and also get better. It's just hard, as you know, to draw that line in a world that's driven by bottom lines and revenues. Kind of like a deeper question I want to ask you is, like, truly, what does success look like for a Support Spot? And what does success look like for you, Katie?
I think success for Support Spot is that the users who are using it truly find value and that a little bit of their burden has been eased. Of course, I want more users. I want more people to be able to benefit from it. But if it's a tool that's not getting used, then it's not useful, and I want it to be useful. I think for me, the other thing I've learned is that I love being a child life specialist. And I truly believe that every day child life specialists are innovating in their jobs and they're truly impacting families. And I want them to know that they can dream and build just like I've been able to dream and build. And I happen to be 7 years into my journey. And sometimes it can be really daunting to think like, what can I do? How can I add value? Oh, I'm just a child life specialist. I couldn't possibly. And I want to show them that you absolutely can. And that not only absolutely can, I have this keynote speech I've been lucky enough to present to child life specialists. And I have a side-by-side comparison of the characteristics of an entrepreneur and then characteristics of a child life specialist. And to me, they're almost exact. They're walking into rooms, they're building trust, they're doing market research, they're collaborating with the care team, they're taking risks. Like so many of the things that we do as child life specialists are what I do every day as an entrepreneur. And so I want the child life profession just to continue to grow. When we have more leaders and innovators in child life, more families get better support.
I love that. Do you feel it resonating with them? Like when you give that speech?
Absolutely. I think it's nice to see someone a few steps ahead. And it's one of the things I love too, like my mentors, like what I see them building. They've been successful in an area and it makes me believe that I can do it too.
Yeah. And I think what you said also just struck a chord where so often people tend to minimize the role.
Mm.
And I feel like in child life, because there's not many of them, and because I think through COVID, like there has been a major reduction in child life specialists, generally speaking, across hospitals, that it can make you feel that you're not valued as much. And that minimization really affects just how you think about yourself in general. So I love the idea of framing it as like, no, you are an entrepreneur. You are capable. You have ideas. You can help bring new concepts to families, because these families that are interacting with child life, most of them they don't know what they're about to get themselves into.
Right.
And they get to be their guide. They get to be their Sherpa. And that is very entrepreneurial by nature, because you are traversing a land, a topic that no one else, that they're not privy to. So I think I love that message, just like as a also empowering. And my guess, I don't want to generalize too much. My guess is most child life specialists are women. And I love the idea of women being reminded that not to minimize their role that they can play in the workplace and beyond.
It's so true, and it's mirroring the message that we send to parents all the time, is that your role as the parent at the bedside is the most important voice there is. More important than your provider, than the team taking care of you. You are the expert on the child. And so your voice, your gut instincts, those tiny things that aren't settling right, those have to honestly take precedence over what happens. And it takes a long time to find your voice when you're speaking with a care team. It takes practice. And so I do recommend like starting small, just by asking a simple question, like asking the nurse to stay in with you while rounds comes by, so that they can help you, number one, field questions, but remind the doctor of what's happening. And that's a simple step that you can take. You can put a sign on the door that says, please don't come in until 1:30 p.m. because you need to take a shower and you don't want anybody coming in while you're in the shower. So these are small things. And the more empowered and the more guts and the more courage you get to do these tiny little things, the next thing you know, you're going to be standing in rounds, collaborating, and your child's going to get better care because of it.
Well, and like you just become a better advocate of not just your child, but of yourself moving forward. Hospital settings, they're so intimidating because at least my experience, you go in thinking that everyone else is the expert. So I'm just following your lead. And what this is so much about what I love about what you've built. It's like empowering and reminding caregivers, parents that no, you have a seat at the table too. And
Yeah.
just because you might not have a certain title or a certain degree, that doesn't mean that you can't at least ask questions. So that you can better understand and so that you can better advocate. I feel like that sort of confidence, you can take that confidence with you everywhere.
I agree completely. And it's hard because we're kind of undoing probably a lot of history that socially providers and care teams have been the end all be all because we haven't had access to information. Right? We didn't know the things they know. We didn't have any way to go look it up unless we were looking in an encyclopedia. Now, with tools like Support Spot and AI and Google and being able to connect with our families, you are able to come to the table and feel like, oh, I have a little bit more information. I don't know if it's right or not. And you ultimately get to make the provider makes the treatment plan, but you get to bring so much more to the table with you. And that's a very cool lesson that we haven't been able to do before in history.
Well, Katie, as we begin to conclude, I would love for you to share with everyone, where can they find Support Spot, recommend Support Spot? Where can they follow you to hopefully further this mission and to get the word out about this incredible resource?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking about it and being willing to share it. So, childlifeoncall.com is where you can find all the information. It's just /support spot if you want to learn more about how to download that. You can also find me on Instagram, where we share a bunch of professional resources for parents, but you can also kind of follow along with my entrepreneurial journey. And then I'm also on TikTok, where I feel a little bit unhinged and I'm maybe more Katie Taylor than I am CEO. So that's just kind of the way it all works with me.
And I'm telling you, just like the podcast, I've recently stepped into this like social media-esque influencer role. And I have many, many times, Katie, gone to your Instagram and TikTok saying, okay, what would Katie do here? Would she just be silly? Would she? And it's such a hard thing to straddle when I don't think maybe you want to be an influencer. I don't want to be an influencer. I just want my company to get out there to the world. And I just think that social media is a means in which of doing that. But boy, oh boy, is it nice seeing another mom that's trying to, like, figure it out, and you're way further along than I am, but it's really, like, it's
Not at
to
all.
me, it's inspiring. It's like, "Okay, just don't worry so much," it's so easy to get caught up in what people are gonna think, and meanwhile, I see you dancing and just
Yeah.
totally embracing it. I love it.
And, I wish there was a method to the madness, Jordan, but I recently had the reframe shared to me, and that it's put out the content and then pretend in your mind that everybody is just going to love it.
Yeah.
And that's
Pretend it's
been
gonna go
really
viral.
fun. And so then you're like, wait, I actually don't care what people are going to think. I'm actually creating this for me because it feels aligned with what I'm trying to do right now. And I don't know, it's just lifted away from me. So maybe that'll help you too.
I love it. No, I will absolutely take that note down for the 45 times later this week that I'm gonna pretend to, get on my phone and do the whole thing.
But
It
yeah,
is it's a different world. Well, Katie, thank you again so much for joining us. I am always rooting for your success. I've said this before we start recording. I really believe that rising tides raises all boats, and the more success Support Spot has, it helps companies like us and vice versa because there's simply a better way of supporting families. We live in a modern world. We should have modern tools that support families and caregivers and supporters and communities. And I feel grateful to be building in this space alongside of you. So many more conversations to come, Katie. Thank you again.
thanks, Jordan, for having me.